So now that we've read the case study, we're going to walk through some of the supports that I use to help differentiate my instruction in that classroom. Hopefully some of these will give you some ideas of things you can tweak or adapt to use in your classroom setting. So I'll start with how I approached reading instruction. All of my students were at different reading levels, as you were able to see. So what I ended up doing is we had a reading rotation in my classroom, and every student had a visual schedule with these icons that all stood for something different. And this was the order of activities that they would have. And so each day they probably had a different order, just depending on their own individual schedules or special schedules. But every day they had at least 3 to 4 things on their reading block schedule. So when it was time for reading group instruction, this was the icon that was shown on their schedule. And that was when they would have reading instruction. I had students that were on different reading curriculum. So some of my students were on the Edmark reading program. I had some students using Wilson reading. And then I also had some students using general ed materials as well. So during that time, they would work with me or a para to do their reading instruction for the day. Then they would also have a spelling icon on their schedule. And each of my students had an individual weekly spelling list. And we had a weekly spelling choice board that they had to complete. And then after they would do one choice board activity, they had one multisensory activity to choose from. So they could write the words using different materials or different modalities. But they first had to do a choice board activity, and then they did a multisensory task. This third icon here is their independent reading work icon. And that was just a folder that they had. And if there was like a worksheet from their Edmark reading program or whatever reading program that had independent worksheets, that might have been in there. I also had this icon, which is like our work task buckets that we use for reading, and those had more hands-on activities or centers. So we had file folders, matching games. Anything that I could make hands-on was put in their work bins. And then there was also the computer center. So this last icon here was independent computer station. And for the first part of the station, they were on a rotation of a required website, either that went along with their reading or spelling program. And then they had some free choice time as well if they completed their tasks. Math differentiation was very similar. Used the similar icons for their math schedules with computer time, work buckets. They also had individual work, and they also had choice board, and they had fluency practice. So those are what could have appeared on their schedules for math. And so computer choice time was, again, specific math programs or websites that I had them go on. The work task buckets were hands-on activities, math centers, file folders, that kind of thing. And I always put a choice of 2 for the day that they could choose from that hit the same objective or standard. They also had like math fluency choice boards. So whatever operation they were working on, they had a choice board with how to practice that. So it was things from listening to songs, doing rap activities, matching activities, listening to the facts, the different ways that we practice those. And then they also had this independent math work folder, similar to the reading folder, where their independent assignment was for the day. And then I also was responsible for social studies and science. I always had 2 groups going. Depending on the unit, I changed how students were grouped. So sometimes they were grouped by readiness, kind of their ability level, and sometimes they were grouped by process, kind of how I was planning to teach the content, whether it was going to be hands-on or listening to it or drawing or visual. I usually split my groups, varied each unit based on those, so they were in different groups at different times of the year. What was nice is that when I did the same unit but just altered, the readiness of the process, I could have some whole group options, and I used split questions and build on questions during whole group, and we're going to talk about that in one of our other stations. But split questions is asking some students one question and then another group of students a different question. Or build on questions would be asking the whole class one question, but maybe a particular one or two students a different question. So I would do that when we had like whole group instruction. For independent time, if I wanted to work in smaller groups, they had differentiated learning menus based on the unit that would carry them through the entire unit. Those were really nice because if a group ran over, they would just continue to work on their menus. We also used text excerpts, so if I wanted to use the same text but I knew not all my students could access that, they would be assigned maybe a sentence or 2 sentences out of the same paragraph so we could all read the same thing but just at different levels. I also used different response options, so some students wrote responses, some talked their responses, some drew their responses, and we also, not on this list, we also used the jigsaw strategy, which we're going to model at the end of this presentation today. So those are just a few ways that I structured my reading, math, and social studies and science groups. Hopefully this gives you some ideas for how you can maybe adapt some of these strategies for your classroom.